Rapidly declining birth rates will see shrinking populations in nearly every country by the end of the century. That's according to a new study. By 2100, it is expected that more than half of all the world's babies will be born in sub-Saharan Africa. That's up from about a quarter in 2021. Meanwhile, the UK's fertility rate has fallen from 2.19 children per woman in 1950 to 1.49 in 2021, making it one of the lowest rates in Western Europe. The implications being a shift in the international balance of power as wealthier countries struggle to maintain economic growth and a reliance, of course, on immigration. Joining me in the studio now is journalist and political commentator Mike Buckley. Good to see you, Mike. And down the line, immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Good to see you, Harjap. Thank you. And head of the New Deal for Parents at the think tank, which is called Onward, Phoebe Arslanagich-Little. Thank you all for joining me. Let's start with you, Mike. Some people watching and listening may think, well, this sounds like a good thing. You know, aren't we always talking about overpopulation? Aren't we talking about too many people, too little food, you know, too few resources? Isn't it great if there are fewer of us altogether?
Well, it isn't, because for our country to function, we need to replace the population. I mean, obviously, we're aware that we know we're all going to get old and we're all going to pass on. We need to be replacing the population. To do that, the average woman in the UK needs to have 2.1 children, because obviously not everybody, very sadly, makes it to, you know, full life expectancy. At 1.5 children
When you say
woman,
we need to replace the population, why do we, when we're always talking about things like not enough school places, not enough houses, not enough social housing? This is a small island. If we get more and more people coming on small boats, yesterday we had the highest number ever crossing over in one single day, over 500 people, then there won't be room for all these people. So why do we need to replace ourselves?
Well, bluntly, because we're going to get old. You know, we're not going to be sitting here on the TV talking forever.
Right.
Your viewers are not going to be doing their jobs forever, or bringing up their own children, or you know, whatever it is. So we need people who are going to pay taxes, to pay for our healthcare, to pay for our social care.
But if there are fewer of us, then there's less of a demand on the NHS, and we need less healthcare.
The thing is, there's a lot of us. If we're being replaced by a few people, those few people are not going to be able to pay enough tax to keep us in health and social care as we get older, or in housing, or, you know, running public services, or doing all the jobs. Those people have to come from somewhere. They either come because we have children, or they become here because of inward immigration. Now, we can make that, well, we are effectively making that choice as a nation by not having enough children. We are making it inevitable that we're going to have to bring in working age population to the UK so that we can get old and still have a functioning economy and society.
Okay, let me bring Harjap into this. Harjap, we're constantly speaking on this programme, you and I. We're always talking about migrants, legal ones, illegal migrants, you know, stopping the small boats, you know, the slowness of processing people who have already arrived here, all this kind of a thing. And the kind of thrust of the conversation and the sort of environment of our discussion is always too many. We haven't got room, there are just too many people, too many. And suddenly we're lamenting a possibility of too few. This is weird for us, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, but as your guest said, it might be necessary. So whilst at the moment we can say that there's a pressure on communities, and there's a pressure on the NHS, and there's a pressure on schools, etc., in the future, it looks like that we won't have the consumers and we won't have the suppliers. And so therefore, what's going to happen is society will crumble unless we have people there to populate it. Now, we can do it two ways. We can either start having children and do our bit for our nation as such, or what we can do is, what will happen is people will come from outside and replace a workforce, replace the consumers, replace the residents. And these things just naturally happen. It's not just Great Britain, or not just the UK. These figures that have come out now, they relate to countries such as the USA, to all European countries, and suggest that the highest population growth will be in Africa or in the Arabian states, as opposed to the European states and the American states. So despite what we hear on a daily basis, the long-term plan will require the population being replaced. And we can see in countries like Japan, where less and less people are getting married, and there's a lot of elderly people. We are now seeing that a lot of the cab drivers are now elderly people having to work in order to keep the whole system alive. You know, there's because there's a lack of marriages going on, there's a lack of children, no one's inheriting houses, no one's inheriting wealth or carrying on the family line. So as such, to avoid them sort of problems that countries such as Japan might be in, we need to be planning for this for the future.
Therefore, is it time we changed our attitude, Harjap, to migrants and migration instead of, flinching and wincing and making, policies out of trying to stop it? Are we supposed to change our mindset and start to welcome it more enthusiastically?
Well, rather than opposed to a blanket welcome, the system of this country should always be that good migrants or migrants who are useful to this country, skilled labour, or migrants who will abide by the rules, who enter here legally, should be welcomed. And as opposed to migrants who come here and commit crimes or are going to be a drain on the system or are not going to contribute to society, then they should not be welcome. It's very easy. Migration is something we can choose. So we can choose to keep the best and the brightest people, but we should also choose to not have or exclude the people who don't benefit to us. It's a very sort of simple thing. We can't blanket welcome everyone who's good, who's here. We have limits and we have to set numbers. So this is the balance that the government needs to do. And unfortunately, the government doesn't seem to be able to be doing that. It cannot differentiate. The systems for doing that have totally broken down. So, we should welcome anyone who wants to contribute to our society. And we should be aware of people who want to do damage to our society.
Let me bring Phoebe into this conversation. So, Phoebe, you heard Harjap say there, we've got a choice, really. We've got to welcome people in from abroad, so that they will take the place of the people that we're not reproducing and we're, going forth and multiplying. Or we can just have more children ourselves. That's the other thing we could do, is step up for the nation and just reproduce a bit more enthusiastically. Is it as simple as that? Can most families just make the choice to have more children, or is there a good reason why they're not doing it?
Well, I think that there's happily an easy middle way here, which is, first of all, that immigration is clearly going to be an important part of replenishing our working age population, and we're going to need it and going to need to rely on it, and it's extremely important. But at the same time, we do have a birth gap in the UK. It's pretty clear from the data that people are having fewer children than they want. So really, I think this is somewhere for government public policy to come in and have a look at the barriers that are making it really difficult for people to have the children they want when they want. Ultimately, a nation's total fertility rate is the result of lots of very highly personal decisions and choices that mount up, that accumulate into one collective outcome, the nation's fertility rate as a whole. But something in the UK, and also actually, in fact, in many other countries, has gone a bit wrong here, because the choice is no longer a choice. People are having fewer children than they want. And people do tell us why that is. And it's because of lots of things that we, I think, quite regularly discuss and understand are a real problem. Things like the housing crisis make it difficult for you to get a home that's big enough for your family. You've got to move far away from your friends and family in search of affordable rents, affordable mortgages. We know how crucial those support networks are for young parents. IVF access is difficult. IVF waiting lists are long. Childcare is expensive. These are all factors where, very happily, this is totally within the gift of government. Government can come in here, make these changes, and make it tangibly easier for parents to have the children that they already want to have.
Mike, is it as easy as that?
I think it is. And to carry on from what Phoebe was saying, fundamentally this comes down to government failing. We've got almost the most expensive childcare in the world. There are lots of people who will want to have children, decide we can't afford to have children, or if they can afford to have children, maybe they just have one. People are living in rented accommodation much more than they used to. That rented accommodation is very expensive. It's also insecure, but it is proven if people feel secure in their own home, which they've bought, they're more likely to have children at all and more likely to have more children if they do. Also, wages haven't gone up meaningfully since 2008, which is, I think, the longest period since somewhere like the 1600s. It's a very, very long time anyway. Understandably, people are feeling a lot more poorer now than they were 20 years ago when wages were consistently going up. Again, that's a reason not to have children. So we can hope, certainly I would hope that we get a change of government this year and that the government pays attention to this because it's like a red warning sign on the dashboard of where the country is. And it needs to change. But it is, as people were saying, the result of lots of different policy choices. One
of the things we don't do in this country, though, is reward mothers or fathers or both for having lots of children. We don't do that. In fact, when there used to be, child benefit paid, you got more for the first and less with every subsequent child, a kind of dwindling amount of money the more children you produce. Whereas in France, for example, you get extra money the more children you produce, don't you?
Well, I presumably do. You tell me.
I think so.
I'm not good on the childcare system in France.
I think you get.
You quite
I think in
possibly do,
France you get
which is a
rewarded
very,
for
very
having more
sensible life
children.
choice. Whereas
Yes.
here, we penalise families for having more than two children. We've got the 2-child benefit limit. If you have 2 children, you get child benefit. If you have 3 or more, you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is penalising families across the board for having more children, which, given where the birth rate at, is a ridiculous choice. I mean, firstly, it's awful, in my view, because it puts children in poverty. You know, I think 43% of families with 3 or more children, their children are in poverty. And that is a direct result of government choice and policy choice. You know, it's pernicious.
Explain why you think that.
Because why are we punishing children who are living in poorer households because their parents decided to have them? It's not the third child's fault that their parents decide to have 3 kids, is it? So we as a society are refusing to pay for that child, and indeed their brothers and sisters.
And isn't that because the mindset
upbringing.
is don't have lots of children, it's terribly expensive, you've got nowhere to put them, we haven't got any school places for them, we don't want them on costing us a fortune on the NHS. Everyone do everyone else a favour and don't have any children or have very few. Isn't that the way we think it?
Particularly in London that are closing down because there aren't enough kids to feed them. To supply them. That isn't the case in the rest of the country, but it will become the case in the rest of the country.
Hajab, what's going on here? Because all we hear day in, day out is don't come and take our stuff, don't come and sit on our chairs, we'll run out of chairs, don't come and use our blackboards, and we haven't got any chalk, you'll take all the chalk. I mean, we keep hearing about kind of depleted resources that are being massively overstretched, and suddenly the whole conversation has shifted in one moment to, oh my God, everything's empty, everything's closing down, we haven't got anybody to use any of our resources or manufacture any new ones. It seems like such a seismic shift, and it feels sudden, doesn't it?
Well, Vanessa, the fact is, right, and if we actually strip it down to its bare bones, this government does have the money. It just doesn't have money for people like us or your viewers. It has money for its friends, for PPE contracts and the fraud for that. It has money for the barges, which are now empty. It has money to spend on Rwanda flights where not a single person has gone to do a PR exercise. It has money to award contracts for defence and for weapons and to sell weapons and buy weapons. It doesn't have money for nurses, doctors, teachers, railway workers, schools, school kids, anyone elderly over the age of 70, anyone under the age of 18 needing a free education. For students, it doesn't have money. And that's what we've got to decide. All of this money, it appears when the government needs it for its own purposes.
Mike, is this extreme? I mean, Hajab's on a soapbox. He's loving a bit of rhetoric here, but I mean, does he mean it? Is it true?
Well, I mean, it is the case that public services has been steadily run down over the last 14 years. I mean, the government came in 2010 and immediately implemented its policy of austerity, which is sucking money out of the public realm, deciding that they want to spend less money. Of course, at the time, that was justified because they needed to, in quotes, fix the economy. But of course, what that did was harm public services, which are now 14 years on, still desperately harmed, and take money away from local councils, which harms local services as well. But of course, it didn't help the economy. It stuck the life out of the economy. We've had a fairly stagnant economy for the last 15 years as well. So the economy here is bad, but that is one thing that feeds through as people make decisions to have fewer children. And in terms of, people not using services, of course, GPs are overstretched, hospitals are overstretched because they have been underfunded. But as we see lower numbers of children going through the schools, that will feed through. So in the end, you've got lower numbers of kids going to university or applying for apprenticeships or doing jobs, applying for jobs in any sector of society, whether it's social care, whether it's business, whether it's the health service, or it's the fire service, schools, whatever it is.
So Phoebe, what do we need to flag up? What is the purpose of our conversation today? What are we trying to establish that people might not already know?
Well, what I think I'd like to be really clear about is that I think we need mainstream politicians to be much more frank about the problem here, to realise that falling fertility is a real problem, but that it's a solvable problem. It's a challenge that we can actually meet. I do worry that there's a sense of sort of apathy and sometimes inevitability about the way that this issue is discussed. And that absolutely does not need to be the case. For a government that's serious about it, there's a great deal of low-hanging fruit here. Small policy changes, medium-sized policy changes that can make a real difference to parents' lives and mean that people who want to become parents anyway, are ready to become parents, can do so. Changes, we've already spoken about IVF, changes in the tax system, we've spoken about the benefit system already. Part of this, I think, is an attitude shift, about communicating really clearly, children are good. It's important that people are able to have children because it's important for individuals and we don't want people locked out of family life, but also being frank about the fact that socially and economically, we need children. They're intrinsically good, they're a good thing, and there are lots of changes we can make to make it easier.
Thank you very much indeed, all three of you.